Better?
Here we go.
Excellent.
The mic was not connected, so good start.
We're off to a great start tonight. Great start.
Anyway, I'm Alex.
And I'm Ben.
And we are Married with Dragons.
Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. I did the solo one last week.
Because I was feeling crappy.
Yeah. Don't worry, I held the ship myself.
That's
Wasn't the same. Wasn't Married with Dragons. It was, I don't know, sole parent with dragons.
I was watching Kardashians in bed. Because trash fixes everything.
But no, it's good to be back at our full strength.
Yes.
Yes. You're high energy tonight.
I am.
I was just laughing at you off stream.
You know how cats have those like certain hours in the day zoomies where it's like, 2 a.m. zoomies, 7 a.m. zoomies, and then nothing until maybe 10 o'clock at night. That's exactly like me.
Your zoomies are normally right when we're trying to fall asleep. Like, it'll be right at that peak time where we're like, oh yeah, let's go to sleep. You're like, let's have a chat. I'm like, no.
And yeah, and then I have my 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. zoomies when you're tired and getting ready for work, and I'm like, I'm very fast.
But it's okay to have zoomies now because we're here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and everything.
It's 8 p.m. My zoomies are starting. They're kicking in.
Anyway, we've got a few different bits and pieces we're going to be covering tonight, doing a bit of a funky story from a recent session.
Yes.
Then following the trend from last week's video where I did the top 10 tips for Dungeon Masters.
Yeah, we're really into lists.
Apparently. It's a thing.
It's a vibe.
It's a new trend for us.
It's a new trend is lists.
Oh God. Following the top 10 DM tips, we've got the top 10 combat tips from Married with Dragons.
Yes.
And these are from both a player and a DM perspective as well.
Yes. So, wait, did you say 10? Top 10. Did you say top tips or top 10?
Top 10.
Okay, cool.
We have 10,
I was going to say we have 10.
Panics.
I was like, I didn't know if you said the number.
No, we have 10. We had to come up with 10 because that's what rolls off the tongue.
It's what sounds nice.
Enunciate.
Yes.
Top 10 tips.
And you wanted to add 11 in there and have 11 top tips.
I know. It was a bad idea. I admit to that.
I accepted it because I accept your flaws, but
that's all right. Our top 10 tips are jam-packed.
Yes,
so it's good. But before we get into that, I'm just going to go through a bit of a short anecdote, a Dungeons and Dragons story from the most recent session that I was running and you were playing in. Where I think that you guys have done very, very well in the campaign so far. But this particular session highlighted perhaps you were getting a bit cocky.
When are we not cocky though?
But your cockiness is growing as a group, as an adventuring group.
Okay. Was this before or after the second level up? Because that would have boosted our ego.
We're not talking about that right now. That's don't tell the people I gave you 2 level ups in one session. They'll think I'm mad. So basically, because it was towards the end of the session when you guys came across this big hunting lodge mansion area. And you did exceptionally well in the area, but I can remember running session thinking damn, you guys are getting some big egos here. And there was one moment in particular where you guys just essentially broke into this house. I mean, the door was unlocked and everything, but you just walked in and made yourselves at home to the point where you were literally taking baths and getting into beds in random rooms throughout the house without actually knowing who it belonged to, who was currently in there.
We like to live life on the edge.
It was great. I loved it. It was fantastic. It was, but yeah, there was one moment in particular where one of the players was sort of happened upon the owner of the house, and they weren't particularly good guys, we'll say. And the owner was basically like, right, I'm going to call a bit of a meeting, have a bit of a chat, sort of expecting some company anyway. And so one of the guards goes into the bathroom, where for some reason 2 of the party members were having a bath together.
A romantic bath.
I mean, they weren't in the same bath, but they were in...
But the bath's close enough so you could hold hands.
Oh, for sure. It would have been romantic. It would have been romantic for sure. 2 baths, in the same room. And the guard comes in. They're obviously butt naked.
Would it have been like the Witcher style?
Maybe not that steamy.
Not that spicy.
They had to heat their own water. It wouldn't have been quite that steamy.
It's
not
steamy.
quite that
It's only
spice.
steamy because Henry Cavill is in it.
Yeah, none of the characters look quite that good.
Yeah.
But yeah, the guard comes in and he's like, right, we're having a meeting. You know, you got to come and have a chat. And like, it's to the point now where like one of the characters was like, okay, sure, gets up, like puts like just his pants on and walks dripping wet, basically butt naked through the house, goes and sits at the dining room of the baddie here. And I can remember at this point I'm thinking, how big are your confidence levels that you don't even require weapons or armor when you confront baddies anymore?
I don't even know. I think we're all like to the point where we're just that comfortable around each other that we think we can be that comfortable around strangers too.
Apparently so. It was great. It made for some great time. But I can remember thinking like, God, I hope a combat breaks out.
Yeah.
Because it'd be great to see this guy try and, you know, handle an encounter in his underwear, basically.
Pretty much.
But I love it. I love it when you guys get confident. I love it when you guys...
I feel like we're confident quite a lot. I think the only time when we're not confident is when like the weaker players are like cornered or feel like they're about to like. When I went into that room and the guard was there and he was about to fight me and I'm like, nope,
Nope.
nope.
Yeah, no, look, that's fair. I'm thinking maybe I should just kill one of you just to teach you a lesson and put you back in line. I'm joking. I'm not going to do that.
Well, don't let it be me because I'm very attached.
Yeah, killing off my wife's character, that wouldn't be suicidal. No, if you die, you die. That's how it works.
Yeah.
You can't hold it against me in real life, okay?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, I know you will try. Anyway, so that's our little D&D story for tonight.
Yes.
So what do you reckon we get into our top 10 tips for combat?
Accentuate that S.
Top 10
The
tips. The P.
Oh, the P.
Top 10
I think
tips.
you're accentuating the T and the S as well.
Top 10 tips. You're confusing me.
Yeah, so with the first one, especially when you're playing D&D as a player, is to really, like, as in any situation, know your character and know your abilities.
100%.
So it's definitely something that you should learn. Like, don't try and pigeonhole into what you only want to know. You should know pretty much everything about your character, what you can do, especially. So even things that you don't think you might not do. Like, yeah. But just know all your capabilities.
Particularly like, features and stuff as well. Like, it's a little bit easier, I guess, to remember stuff like, attack rolls and what your modifiers are. But even just familiarizing yourself with, your character's features and abilities that aren't as, like, just related to your roles, because I've played in games and watched videos and stuff, and there's so many times where players will miss out on really important, strong sections of their character just because they totally forget about it. But yeah, even just the simple stuff like knowing what your spells do, knowing how your attacks work.
Yeah, and like you said with feats, I feel like sometimes feats kind of, unless you're using it quite often,
can be forgotten about.
It can be forgotten about and can be quite looked over. And especially if one of your feats gives you, let's just say, resistance to bludgeoning if you activate it or something like that.
I can tell you're making up your own feats now. That's a pretty bloody strong feat.
I swear the barbarian has something like that.
That's not a feat. That's a rage. That's their rage ability. It's not a feature. But you are correct. You are correct in saying that it's important to understand the abilities of your character, of your class, and your race and whatnot. Not only for your sake, but also to make sure that the combat doesn't get bogged down either. Because there's nothing worse than having a combat. It gets to someone's turn. It's like, right now, how does this work again? Or right now, I've forgotten what this ability means. Or how does this spell work? Like, obviously, there are times you can be like, hey, spells in particular. Hey, DM. How does the ruling of this particular spell work? But you don't want to be doing it all the time to the point where it's bogging down combat.
Yeah, exactly. Like, by the time, I understand, I feel as though you get a bit of leeway once you learn new spells, but if you're using the same spell since, say, level 1 or 2, and you're now level 8 getting close to the double digits, you probably should know it by now.
Yeah.
Especially if you use it frequently.
And, not just for the smoothness of combat and keeping combat moving quickly, but also just so that it helps you make informed decisions as well. Like, it helps you be like, right, on my turn, this is what I want to do because I know what everything does.
Yeah, exactly.
So it helps with that sort of thing. So, yeah, definitely a really solid tip number 1. Tip number 2, be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, so that could easily be something... So... What's a good example?
So there's lots of examples for this. One of the primary ones, I guess, again, say if you are a spellcaster, you're in a small area, small room, with, your teammates are all packed in, and, if you use an area of effect spell, like a fireball or a thunderwave, be aware that that's going to impact your allies as well as your teammates. So, stuff like, surroundings like that. Also be aware of your surroundings, though. Maybe you're on a ledge and there's lava 50 feet below. Or there's, you're in a swampland, there's difficult terrain making it harder to move.
Or even if you're in somewhere and you're trying to be very, very conspicuous and silent, and you decide if you use an area of effect like Thunderwave, that has a 300-foot boom.
600-foot boom.
600-foot boom.
Well, it might be 3.
It's
a big boom.
It's 300, a 300-foot boom where that could easily alert more enemies, or even alert the, what do you call them, BBGs?
Oh, the big bad evil guys.
Yeah, something that you try and get past, or something even worse, or fail a mission or something like that.
Make sure you're thinking about more than just you and the guy that you're attacking. Say you want to be looking at the situation as a whole and being aware of everything, not just I want to deal damage. Because it's really important to be aware of that sort of stuff. Particularly if you are doing something that has a bit of an area of effect and you do hit some friendlies, then they may not be very impressed by that.
Or they may not have time to be impressed because they'd be dead.
Yes, true. Very true. Very true.
Gotta say it.
But yeah, very important tip number 2.
Yeah. And the next one, number 3, is plan when it's not your turn. So that is very...
Preach it.
Very important. Not only because you're holding up the DM, but you're holding up pretty much your whole party. Because everyone doesn't want to... unless you are purely playing D&D for combat.
And the mechanics.
And the mechanics of combat. No one really wants to stay in combat for hours on end.
And unfortunately, combat is one of the things in Dungeons & Dragons that can lag a little bit. It's difficult to have a quick-paced combat system in that sort of game. So it is something that can take a little bit of time. So doing something simple, like thinking about your turn and knowing what you want to do when it gets to your turn, can really make the process much more enjoyable.
And it also helps when you're waiting for your turn if someone does something else and it changes your strategy. That way you don't, for example... Just say you weren't really listening, or you're on your phone, or you're doing something else, and you didn't notice someone did this, and you go ahead with your strategy. You didn't plan correctly because you weren't aware of what was happening around you.
And also, it keeps you engaged as well in combat. If you're paying attention, you're thinking about your turn when it's not your turn, it's going to keep you engaged and keep you interested in the combat that's happening, even though you're not specifically having a go, which is going to make it a lot more of an enjoyable experience anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Tip number 4. This one's more so for Dungeon Masters. Don't be afraid to use timers or similar sort of tools like sand glasses?
Hourglasses.
I wouldn't use an hourglass. That's a long period of time for a turn. But
minute timers.
The things
Egg timer.
Things that keep time. That was a well-articulated point. So what I mean by that is it's not applicable for every group per se, but I've done it. I think it's worked pretty well previously. If you've got a group where some players or all players are taking a really long time on their turn, it's really dragging combat out for a long period of time, people are losing engagement from it, it's a bit of an issue, you can introduce a timer. So as soon as someone's turn starts, the way I've done it before, I've used 30 seconds, which is a long period of time. It doesn't sound...
Yeah, especially if going back to the last point, if you plan, 30 seconds is plenty of time to get your turn out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even just like that 30 seconds, if you need more time to actually physically roll the dice or move your mini or whatever it might be, that's fine. But you've got 30 seconds to make a decision and decide what you're doing on that turn.
You don't have 30 seconds to do your whole role playing or anything like that. So it's pretty much making
a decision.
Yeah.
And the reason behind that is to make combat feel like it's got a bit of urgency and excitement to it, because it's meant to all be happening really quickly, almost simultaneously. So meant to add that to it as well. And if you don't make a decision in the time limit, basically your character is frozen with fear or is hit with adrenaline and can't figure out what to do, and you miss your turn. I guarantee you, a player will not have that happen more than once. If it's their turn and the timer goes off and you as a DM say, sorry, you missed your turn, you took too long, I promise you, they will not let that happen again.
Yeah.
Because players do not want to miss their turn. So
exactly.
A great incentive, like I said, not applicable to every group, maybe something you can discuss with your players, but a great incentive for people to try and actually...
And get things moving along.
Yeah, stay engaged, keep it all flowing.
Yeah, now you mentioned before being frozen with fear. So fear is a condition which every player should understand the different types of conditions out there. So this is pretty much maybe things that the abilities or features or spells that you have that may not do actual hit damage, but you can affect an enemy with either them being charmed.
Or they could affect you.
Or they could affect you, vice versa, doesn't matter which way it goes.
So this actually leads into tip number 5.
Yes.
Understanding conditions.
Yes, sorry, tip number 5. I thought I made that point. Yeah, so this is the next tip. So being frozen with fear, which is the result of being frightened.
So, so frightened is the condition.
Yeah.
So basically, if you're frightened, it means that you can't move closer to the enemy. And if you are within sight of the enemy, your attacks against it have disadvantage.
Yeah.
Sorry, if the enemy is within. So if you can see the enemy, basically.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different conditions. There's
like
poisoned, petrified, stunned, paralyzed. There's lots of different conditions, and I think it's a great charmed. It's a great idea for players to try and familiarize themselves with that.
Yeah.
Not essential, it's not you must remember all these sorts of things, because obviously the DM can help you with that, but you're starting to get familiar with them as a player.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of spells that they may not hit for damage, or they still do hit for damage, but they also is successful on whatever saving throw an enemy does. They can either be frightened, or where they completely run away from you, or they can be charmed by you, so then you can control them or influence them, and stuff like that. So it's just a kind of a good thing to understand, especially if you're picking spells, what you're exactly picking and understanding what that spell does.
Yeah, and just understanding sort of what can impact the ebb and flow of combat as well. Those sorts of things can really change the dynamic of how combat might be going. It's certainly very, very helpful, I think, for players to familiarise themselves with the conditions.
Definitely.
Tip number 6, also a really, really important one, and I love this one, and something that probably people don't necessarily think of too often, but it is okay to not deal damage on your turn. It's totally fine to not deal damage. I think there's a sort of preconceived idea, particularly if you haven't played D&D much before, that on your turn, you've got to try and deal as much damage as you possibly can to enemies A, B, or C, or D. Definitely not the case. And actually, you've probably experienced that a lot more with your current character playing a bard, having a lot more options.
There's been some... I think it was the last combat that we had where I think it was resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and... Slashing, yeah, I was like...
From non-magical... slapping damage!
Whatever it was. And I was low on spells, so I was just kind of like... What do I do? I'm like, okay, I'll just do a cantrip, which could do damage, but then I might throw maybe I might ready my crossbow, my action as I was going to say, what do I have? My crossbow, or I might even use my turn to use maybe like bardic inspiration instead to help support, or
Or even if you've got something, a way to damage an enemy available, there's nothing wrong with as you said, readying an action and waiting for a particular scenario to play out, or even taking the dodge action if you're in a lot of trouble. Maybe you spend your turn healing your allies or debuffing the enemies without actually damaging them.
Or if you want to get really unique, I can remember in the last one of our last campaigns when I played a barbarian, I think we had an enemy that was resistant to all the physical damages. And as a barbarian, you're not a spellcaster, so there's not much you can really do. So I was like, all right, well, I'll try lighting this torch on fire and poking it with this
Yeah.
up torch just to do something, and
Yeah.
just stuff like that.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to straight out do damage in a round of combat. You can certainly do many other things. So don't feel like you have to, I guess.
Yes.
Tip number 7.
Tip number 7. So strategizing and communication. So this kind of plays in part with planning out your turn, because you're planning out your strategy as well. So make sure, actually it ties in pretty much majority of the tips that we've discussed. So strategizing can be like using the environment, knowing where your players are, communicating with your players. It doesn't have to be, talking across the table. You could actually be role-playing as your character. So you could be, one of your allies could be in danger of a move you want to do, and you could yell out, "Oh, get out!" Obviously more creative, get out of the way.
Or even one of the really cool ones in one of the campaigns we're running at the moment was a moment where the fighter had dropped his shield, or had used he had stuck his shield to an enemy, and the combat had sort of progressed and continued. He wasn't using his shield, and the paladin sort of I think he either kicked it or threw it, but put the shield through the air. It was flying through the air, and the fighter on his turn caught the shield.
Style.
Yeah, Captain America style. Yeah. Caught the shield and did it. So that sort of strategy, that made for such a unique and awesome moment.
Yeah.
So those sorts of like teamwork stuff can really add a bit of something special to your combat.
Yeah, and it can also really help save other allies too. So another example was in a combat that will end, and I think I had 2 enemies surrounded by my bard, and we had another fighter come in, and I'm not sure if it was a feature, but he did something where it allowed me to escape without an attack of opportunity.
He used an ability.
He used an ability, So, just stuff like that.
Yeah, so working together.
Yeah.
After all, you guys are a team. You guys are an adventuring party, obviously trying to achieve a goal. The biggest thing you have going for you is your ability to obviously work off each other's strengths and whatnot. So definitely recommend doing that. But this next tip, number 8, sort of ties into that a little bit, I guess, on the opposite end, is try not to metagame. And this is for DMs as well. Now, I say try not to metagame because it can be really difficult, and sometimes you might accidentally do it, particularly if you've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a long period of time. You might know when you go into a combat, I'm going into a combat, I know this troll's weaknesses. I know its strengths and weaknesses. Try as a player your best not to fall into that trap of, I'm just going to use this because I know this is what works. It's going to be a lot more fun and engaging for you to try and get into your character's head and be like, right, this is what my character's experienced. This is what my character might know. I'm going to discover those strengths and weaknesses myself, or as a team, obviously, in this combat, not using your outside knowledge too much.
It also spoils it for beginner players who have never come across that type of enemy as well. So if a new character's come across an enemy, they want to also discover it like as a team. If you come going in like, oh no, they're resistant to fire, I know this one, I've done this, I've dealt with this thing before, or if the DM hasn't actually said what the name of the beast is, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a frost giant, for example.
Not naming and shaming, but I can remember in a previous campaign I've run, there was a moment, it was relatively early-ish on in the campaign, and you guys ended up fighting a troll, and there was a fair few new players in that campaign as well, but there were also players, I think, such as yourself, who had never come across a troll before.
Yeah, and you don't usually, as a DM, when we come across combat, you don't go out like, okay guys, you are now facing a beholder. You're facing
I'll just
troll.
describe the enemy to you, and it's up to you guys to figure it out. But you guys figured out sort of what you were facing along the way, and there was this cool, I was sort of going for this badass moment where they had slain the enemy, but if you're not aware, I think is it Radiant and Fire? There's, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's either Radiant and Fire or one or the other. If you don't kill a troll using that specific type of damage, it will just continuously come back to life. It'll keep coming back to life and it'll keep trying to attack you. However, the party had killed the troll, we'll say, and I was describing the scene where it's like the troll's dead, you're victorious, it was a tough fight, and one of the players said, oh no, it's not dead, we didn't use any fire damage.
Yeah.
And it sort of ruined a lot of the role play of that moment, because it was like I was sort of as a dungeon master building to, after you guys have lowered your defense, it's going to reach out and try and grab at you, and it's still alive, and you got to continue the fight. But because of that sort of style of metagame, the combat lost a lot of that excitement.
Yeah, and it ruined the surprise. That you'll be like, okay.
And it can be difficult, which is why we say try not to metagame. Yeah. Or if you do know something, don't share it with necessarily the other players at the table. And in the same breath, the dungeon master as well. Just because you might know your players' strengths and weaknesses doesn't mean the enemies you're controlling will know all of them. So making sure that you're not picking on stuff that you as the dungeon master knows that your enemies might not. And also making sure that you're playing it fair in the sense that, if your players can flank and if your players can do all these cool things, the enemies can too. So trying to make sure it's a level playing field.
Yeah. And so tip number 9 is that combat doesn't have to end with death. It also doesn't have to involve fighting either. So especially when the whole... roll for initiation. Initiation.
The hazing begins.
This is where you make the real team. These are the trials. Initiative.
Your zoomies are coming into play now.
Initiation.
But I'm a big advocate of, when I explain to all my players when I'm running a game as well, when I say roll for initiative, that just means that there's a turn order coming into play. It doesn't mean that you have to fight to the death.
Yeah, so combat, if you are fighting, it doesn't have to end with slaying, especially if there was maybe combat started with a discussion that then grew into a fight. You could end it with a discussion or with a negotiation, with a deal, with a... you could choose to just tie up the weakened enemy.
Knock them unconscious.
Maybe even set them free.
Yeah. You could flee. You could run away. If the combat's too difficult and it's not something that your party's prepared for.
You don't have to do combat from literally from start to finish. It can...
That's a big tip, because that's, again, one other big thing that really separates this game from stuff like video games.
Yeah.
When you're playing a video game, you get to a boss fight, you fight the boss, you fight it and you kill it, and then a cutscene will appear or whatever. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, or tabletop games in general, that's not the case. If you get into a combat like where initiative is rolled, you could get creative and get come up with social ways of getting out of it, or just running away, or you could fight to the death, you could knock out and capture. There's so many different things you can do. So keep that in mind, because I think, again, a lot of people
think you have to fight to kill.
Get that tunnel mindset of, right, I have to kill this guy now. Initiative's been rolled. Let's brutally murder everyone. Initiation has been rolled. Even more badass. But really, really important tip.
Yeah.
And then tip number 10, which is probably one of the tips that makes combat probably most fun, is get creative.
Yeah.
This is a really, really big one.
That could come down to pretty much anything, really. You could, if you wanted to run away but do a backflip on the way out, or do some triple flips here and there.
Or even get creative with sort of what you were mentioning before. You realised your damage wasn't doing anything, so you grabbed a torch, used your environment. Getting creative could be pushing someone off the ledge and into the lava. Or,
as you may have seen in one of our previous episodes, throwing a bowl of soup.
Yeah, whatever works. Think outside the box. Grapple someone so that your teammate can attack. Really, again, this is one of the big things that separates this from stuff like video games, is there's no limitations.
Yeah.
You don't have to push X, box, circle, or triangle. You can do whatever you can sort of come up with.
Yeah, and getting creative also with how you want to do your moves as well. So get descriptive. Instead of saying, I will hit this one with my axe. You could say I grabbed my axe and I flung it with such force that it depends on your roll, that if you rolled really well, that you cracked its knee or shoulder. And
get creative with your descriptions.
Or what you'd always remind me to do with my bard, if I wanted to say, I think I did this once with my Thunderwave, grabbed my flute and did the whole Thor thing, but I stuck the flute into the ground to...
Exactly. You didn't just say, I cast Thunderwave.
Yeah.
You say, I grab my flute, I slam into the ground, and energy explodes around me.
Yeah.
Like, that sort of stuff. It really, it takes the game to a whole new level.
Yeah. And it can be, anything as small or as large as you want it to be. Like, even just... Maybe even describing how your character is feeling, like, oh, you just got a rush of anger and you can see in my eyes, like anything like that. If you're not, just anything simple like that, just to flavour it a little bit compared to just, hitting my sword, stabbing my sword.
Yeah. Get creative. It's not just about rolling dice and calculating numbers.
Yeah.
It's about the actual adventure and imagination part as well.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounded like a bit of an after-school special, that sentence. But no, I mean it. It is really about the creativity.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are our top 10 tips for great, memorable combat in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Are you ready for are you now? We've got through the list. Are you ready for your favourite part?
Yeah.
I had to do the joke myself by my lonesome last time.
I'm glad I didn't have to hear it.
When I said my joke, I wasn't used to not hearing your eyes roll when I said my joke.
No, I would have given you a eye roll sometime during that night. I would have made up for it.
I'm sure you're right, but you're here now. You can
let's go.
laugh the brilliance of my D&D joke in
Let's
person.
do it.
All right, are you ready?
Yep.
What is a lost werewolf called? Wait, sorry.
Oh my god.
I definitely stuffed it up. What is a lost lycanthrope called? A werewolf.
Oh my god.
That's a good one!
It would have been better if you got it right. I was going to say, is it a werewolf?
Shh. A lost lycanthrope is called a werewolf.
Yes.
Oh, the pressure got to me.
That was very funny.
I thought so.
Very clever.
It was funny even after I butchered
Yes.
the joke. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for tonight's episode of Married with Dragons.
Yeah, we are on every Thursday at 8 p.m.
Make sure you tune in.
On Game on Oz.
On Game of Oz.
I feel like there should have been more of that sentence.
I was waiting for more to the sentence, and there was sort of just nothing further came. But yeah, every week, same time, same place, hosted by Game on Oz, talking about all things Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Even the most ridiculous parts.
Always the most ridiculous parts.
So feel free to come in and tune in and have a chat and learn a thing or two about D&D, which is certainly a very big passion of ours.
If you don't need to learn anything,
just come and hang out.
Discuss.
Absolutely.
Make fun of your jokes.
If I get them right.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Hey legend, thanks for watching the show. If you want to make sure that you're up to date with all of the Game on Oz content here on YouTube, make sure you click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.